robot. The polio vaccine developed for human use only after it has tested on animals has helped reduce their disease to near irrelevance. Advance in breast cancer, brain trauma, leukemia, cystic fibrosis, malaria, multiple sclerosis, and tuberculosis are directly attributed to animal experimentation, and without testing on chimpanzees, there will be no hepatitis B vaccine. And the posture against will defend certain kits of animals research involve subjecting creatures that what can apply be described as torture. According to the Human Society International, animals are routinely force-fed, forced to inhale noxious compounds, deprived of food and water, physically restrained for prolonged periods, and burned. Some of them reportedly even had their necks broken and are decapitated. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Agriculture reported that nearly 100,000 animals suffer pain during experiments while not being administered any anesthesia. It is also a common practice for animals' eyes to be held open with clips for hours and even days in the course of testing cosmetic products. Now that the rules have been established, let me remind you the general rules of the debate. The maximum number of participants is 5. There should be not more than 3 speakers and 2 researchers. The members of each team can have printed information, which includes books, sheets of paper, flashcards, dictionaries, etc. For argumentation, it is completely forbidden to use any electronic devices such as laptops, mobiles, and tablets. The communication between the members of each team must be exclusive written. Therefore, oral communication will be fine. Just as making fun of other team verbally or with gestures, as well as shots or hitting the table, are forbidden behaviors during this debate. The moderator must inform the judges about the willful misconduct of the team. Any questions should be a maximum of 3 lines and must be accompanied with the inference of the debater who mentioned it. No doubts? Doubts? No? With all these rules already mentioned, we will go to the next stage of this debate, which is the exposition of the opening statement. We will start with Faber. You got up to 4 minutes for your speech, and it's completely forbidden read the posture.
So far as animals are concerned, we have no direct duties. Animals are not self-conscious and are there merely as a means to an end. That end is man. German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Good evening, jury, distinguished moderator, opposing table, and public that accompanies us today. We are here to debate over the topic of animal testing. It is our sincere belief that animal testing is absolutely necessary for humanity. Without it, we would have to resort to risking human lives in order to find cures for diseases. Animal testing not only benefits us, but benefits the very animals we test on. Also, there exists an ethics committee that all researchers must go through in order to ensure that no blood is shed unnecessarily. Throughout the years, humanity has obtained knowledge spanning from medical to anatomical testing on animals, no matter how cruel the means could be. For example, in between the 17th and 18th century, there were experiments done on dogs that involved nailing their paws onto boards and cutting them open in order to comprehend how blood flows through the body. While this can be seen as cruel, if these experiments had never taken place, we would have never had our knowledge of blood circulation. Also, thanks to these tests, scientists were able to observe how closely the bodies of animals resembled the bodies of humans, leading to a more humane treatment of animals. Another example is the modern use of genetically modified mice used to find treatments for a number of diseases, including cancer. Yes, these animals are being forced to suffer and possibly die from a disease caused by man. But thanks to this, we are constantly getting closer to a cure for a disease that has stripped away the lives of innocent men, women, and children. As cruel as it may be, is it not a necessary sacrifice? The reason we are able to transplant organs is thanks to animal testing. The reason we have efficient vaccines, vast anatomical knowledge, and common medicines are thanks to these tests. Insulin, used for type 1 diabetes, which used to be a disease where people died shortly after contracting it, was procured thanks to animal testing. If we had lived in a world where humanity thought it was better to save mice than to save their own species, if we lived with a common mentality that we should not harm animals in order to save ourselves, then we will have lost all respect and decency towards human life. Thank you.
Thank you. The time used by the favor posture was 2 minutes 32 seconds. We will continue with the position posture, please. You got up to 4 minutes for your speech.
Good morning, jury, opposite table, moderator, and everyone here that accompanies us. Today, we will discuss why it is completely incorrect and unethical to use animals for experimentation nowadays. We know animals' DNA is like the human ones, but it is not the same. Most of the results of these tests are unreliable and even dangerous. The harmful use of animals in experiments is not only unethical and abusive, but also often ineffective. Of over 1,000 potential stroke treatments that had been successful in animals, only approximately 10% progressed in human trials, and most of them didn't even work. It is not only the time and the money wasted in animal experimentation. We're talking about a life which suffers and agonizes. Animals are forced to inhale noxious compounds. They live deprived of food or water, or in the opposite, they are overfed. They are harmed, they are burned, or even decapitated while not being administered any anesthesia. Animals are forced to suffer. Besides, this is the 21st century. We must comprehend that animals are not our instruments. They live here in our same world. We have no right to decide over their lives. There are new alternatives that could be used instead of animal experimentation, and all the money wasted could be invested in developing these alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, position poster. The time used was 1 minute 30 seconds. Thank you. Next, we are going to start with the second part of this debate, the question, answer, and replica section. The dynamic is the following. One of the speakers raised her hand to ask a question. All of the members of the opposite table can raise their hand to answer it. Right away, all the speakers of the table team that ask the question can replicate the answer made by the other team. As a reminder, the debaters must keep their hand raised in order for me to know whether you still want to participate or not. Now we start with the question of the opposition team. Yes, miss?
Thank you. Isn't it worth it to invest and research the alternatives in order to stop hurting and killing animals in such cruel ways?
Yes, it is. After all, the experimenters in animals live by the principle of the 3 R's, which is to replace, reduce, and refine. But until now, we fail to see how these so-called alternatives can produce results that are usable and can work independently without animal research.
Because of evolution, animals have figured a way in their biological system to deny pain, so they do not suffer.
First of all, opposite table, what the opposite table just mentioned about the not suffering is quite a fallacy, as it is proven that many of these animals do not get anesthesia for their treatments, and they just get paralyzed, so they feel every single step in the process.
Actually, they use anesthesia. Scientists are required to use anesthesia on animals because if they hurt them, they cannot get the results they need. If they hurt animals and they have, oh, then you mentioned that they exist alternatives that can override animal testing, but I ask you, what alternatives have provided with results that can actually be comparable to those that animal testing has provided?
Well, there are quite a few. For example, the eye chip, the skin patch test for toxicity, which is way better than animal testing, because in animal testing, the failure rate of the toxicity test is enormous, while in the skin patch test, it's truly little, small, and well, it has been diminished during these years. Also, the computers and the simulators in vitro, and there are several other things, for example, in bacteria. They are now experimenting in bacteria, which is way better than hurting and killing animals.
Complementing what my partner said, there are also eye chips in silico, laboratory-produced skin, and opposite table. Animals are very different from humans. The anatomic, metabolic, and cellular difference make animals poor models for human beings.
Complementing what my partner said, even microfluidic chips, organs on chip, can predict the toxicity of substances without invasive experiments on animals.
The opposition did not correctly answer a question as we asked for results of the alternatives, not the alternatives themselves. And what we have to say about these alternatives is that they are normally used before animal trials, since they cannot work independently. You cannot work with independent parts of an organism. An organism is a complex system that implicates other organs and not just, for example, the skin, as the opposition mentioned. For example, we need to test on a living being how a skincare item can affect other parts of the body, and there is, until now, no way to correctly simulate said system.
92% of tests that have been done outside an animal body have failed when taken into humans.
Also, you mentioned computer simulations, but if an advanced program cannot even predict the weather, how do you expect a simulated program to predict what will happen to your body?
Opposite table, are animals being protected by any specific law at least?
Not necessarily a law, but we did mention the 3 principles of the 3 R's, as we said. Replace the use of animals with alternative techniques, reduce the number of animals used to a minimum, refine the way experiments are carried out to make sure animals suffer as little as possible. And there is also ethical committees that that work to see if these animal trials are truly needed for the testing. And lastly, there has been recently cosmetic bans that ban the experimentation on cosmetics of animals, which is a clear example of the principle of the 3 R's. In the cases of the United Nations, India, Israel, and Switzerland, many others.
There is also the Animal Act that was created in 1986.
Well, opposite table, that's right. Animal experimentation, it is about fulfilling the principle of the 3 R's: replacement, reduction, and refinement. However, 95% of animals used in experiments are not being protected by the Federal Animal Welfare Act.
Complementing what my partner said, not everyone follows the principle of the 3 R's because as they're not established, they're not forced to be followed. And also, the Animal Welfare Act has not succeeded in preventing horrific cases of animal abuse in research laboratories, as they are not established as law globally. So they are not protected, and that's why animal testing is being so cruel and rude.
So, seeing that these alternatives cannot provide any results and the opposition has not given us any foundable results of these alternatives, is the opposition in favor of using humans for experimentation due to the fact that if there would be no animal testing, we would need to move from the phase of the so-called alternatives to the human phase of trials? Since we have previously stated that alternatives cannot, at this point, give stable and foundable results, we are asking the opposition if they are against in favor of experimentation moving directly into human experimentation without previously being inserted into a living organism.
Well, opposite table, since you did not hear what we already said, the alternatives, which do not include humans, because experimenting on humans is not quite ethical. But if you want to, we can give you more results. For example, Avacare, which is for AIDS, Statubine, Tenofovir, Citonavir, and well, they were all tested in vitro, and they all work, which means that animal testing is not needed anymore for the AIDS cure, treatment. Also, opposite table, no, experimenting on human beings is not ethical. Why? Because, they are reasoning and they feel. Animals do not reason, but they do feel as well. So it is not ethical either. So the alternatives mentioned before work better, and the results have been better, faster, cheaper, more effective, feasible, and in every single way, better.
We would like to remind the opposition of the data of 92% of in vitro does not work and does not provide feasible results. Not only this, it is highly likely that the previously mentioned results were obtained not only with said alternatives, but also through passing to a number of animal trials and experimenting in living organisms.
Opposite table, would you consider animal testing functional?
Yes, as through history, animal testing has provided with a lot of medicine that has helped both animals and humans.
Given that these alternatives are fairly recent, most of what we know of science and medicine is known through animal research. The very foundation of science and medicine has been obtained to using animal models for testing.
First of all, Postable, according to Cambridge, the definition of functional is something which is designed to be practical and useful rather than attractive. So is a 5% rate of success functional? Well, no, it isn't, because it's not neither practical nor feasible, nor cheap, nor anything which can describe functional. Also, Postable, you just mentioned that it's the base and foundation of medical experimentation. Well, maybe you're not familiar with the term evolution, but it should be implied here. And instead of keep hurting and killing animals that we do not own by no innate right, we should evolve and try to find and, keep developing the already existing and functional alternatives.
Complementing what my partner said, drugs that are animal tested are not necessarily safe. In the 1950s, the sleeping pill thalidomide, which caused 10,000 babies to be born with severe deformities, was tested on animals prior to its commercial release.
Right now, the opposite table mentioned that animal testing is not functional, yet I would like to ask them, is the discovery of insulin, a medicine that helps people with diabetes and animals, is it not functional? Is it not practical? Has it not helped save lives?
Opposable, as mentioned before, it had helped, but in the past. Right now we're in the 21st century, and by this, we need to improve, get better, and evolve, and stop hurting animals that we do not own, because they are not ours to use just as objects for testing and experimenting things that are benefited for us, not for even for them. Also, Dr. Albert Sabin, which is one of the inventors of the polio vaccine and the inventor of, well, the discoverer of insulin, are saying that they regret testing on animals because it just delayed the discovery.
Complementing what my partner said, animal testing is often on trying to find cures, but the experiments get completely until a human gets a prototype. So it's totally nonsense to prove it before on animals.
The opposition mentioned the evolution of science, yet they keep saying that animal testing did not work in the past, but did not work now. We fail to see how this correlates with your previously said words.
Aposhivo, could you tell us what is the rate of failure in medicines developed by animal testing when tried in human beings? Aposhivo, could you tell us what is the rate of failure of medicines developed by animal testing when tried on human beings?
We fail to see how asking for data and simply data incites a debate. We ask of the opposition to ask questions that will incite a debate. This is not an exam. We're not here to question the knowledge of each other's minds.
Well, actually, yes. Well, a debate is based on facts, and we have to use them, not only our opinions. And also, as the opposite table does not come with the correct information or the information enough to complete this debate, we will kindly give it to you. It is 94% rounded up to, so it means that 94% of the medicine and experiment tried on animals fail when tried on human beings. This means that it is not functional, neither feasible nor cheap. It is an extreme waste of time, animals, money, and everything, while the alternatives do not waste any of this because they are cheap and faster, better, and more feasible.
Opposite table, only 5% of animal testing throughout 20 had succeed. So what's the point of testing on animals?
If you believe that the lives of animals are so important, do you believe that humans and animals are in the same level?
First of all, Positivo, what we believe or think is not quite relevant to this debate as it is based on facts, and we need correct information which we can use to debate, not what we think. But animals need to be respected because they are not ours to take as mere objects. They are not supposed to be protected just like simple objects in factories because that's not what they are. They are part of this world and we owe them some respect because they are living, feeling things. They are not ours to take just like we want to, whenever we want to, just because we can. That's just wrong and unethical, and it goes against bioethics.
Humanity is an animal species as well. Our objective as a species is to survive, and animals also use other animals for survival by eating each other. We ourselves are using the other animals for our own survival. It is simply a necessary thing to do, and we do it in the most humane and ethical way possible.
Opposite table, is the lethal dose 50? The currently most used toxicity method accurate nowadays?
Well, as we have previously stated, no, they have been replaced with EpiSkin, but as we say, we must abide by the 3 R's, and we do believe in the 3 R's, but we still fail to see the results of alternatives that have been supposedly found through these methods.
When you say it's being replaced, you are proving that is not accurate anymore. The lethal dose 50 kills 50% of the animals where it's tested. The Valitox, that is the alternative method, has an accuracy of 75% in both animals and humans. So we are searching for a mutual benefit.
Of the table, the correct answer is only 6 out of 114 human toxicities had animal correlates, which means that the percentage of the rate of success of this test are pretty much inexistent. Also, of the table, well, this, as mentioned before, is something of the past century. We have to keep going and find new alternatives that we already mentioned with the results, but you keep not listening to what we say. So if you want us to repeat us in the crossfire section, we will.
Opposite table, let's please remember that we are looking for the benefit of both animals and humans. And animals have basic moral right to respectful treatment. The inner rate value is not respected when animals is reduced to being mere tools in a scientific experiment.
Okay, so the opposition has mentioned that we use animals as tools, that we don't care about animals, and that we don't look for what benefits animals. But is the opposition aware that every single thing we know about veterinary science is all thanks to animal testing?
Yes, of course, it's stable, but still, what we know about human medicine is based on animals, and it's wrong, because you try to justify this by saying that animals are benefited. But what about the cases where dogs were forced to smoke just to prove how cigarettes would work on humans and how to improve them? That's not a necessity, nor something that is basic for living. That's just something that is selfish for human beings, and they are testing on animals, which will kill them, and they have no guilt in this.
Yes, opposite table, animal testing really was functional, but come on, it's 21st century. Let's please improve. Let's just remember that animals are not objects. We can't use them as if they were.
If dogs haven't been forced to smoke, well, a lot of people right now would have died of lung cancer.
And also this example of the dogs is a very clear example of the 3 R's, as we can see the refinement of animal testing through years. Now, that wouldn't pass by any chance through an ethics committee due to the fact that it's not very necessary and that it's inhumane. It would have been done in a more humane way and ethical way.
Opposite table, how do you justify the using of animals for experimentation in cosmetics?
Well, we need to know if these products will affect the human system as a whole, and we need to test it in a living organism, not just in the skin, because as we previously mentioned, the body is a complex system, so maybe something that affects the skin can end up affecting the liver. That's why we test on animals, to see if this test will affect humans in the future.
Well, opposite table, as far as we know, animals do not wear makeup, and makeup is not a basic necessity for human beings. Also, there are already vegan makeups where animals are not used and they completely work. So why do we keep using animals for cosmetics if we already have makeup that is vegan and does not harm anyone? As a rhetorical question.
Is the opposition aware that skin irritation is a constant in animals as well as humans?
Yes, opposite table, we are. But because of the differences between animals and human beings is why we cannot test the same thing in such different human beings, living things. For example, the difference in the DNA, even if it seems little, is way too big, and it can cause many different outcomes, which is why the toxicity test does not work when tested on animals and then on human beings.
Just to mention some examples of the vegan makeup, there are The Body Shop and Jeffree Star in silicone, and that were proved in silicone test. And
there's no necessity to hurt animals, so humans may be able to wear makeup.
Complementing what my partner said, 94% of cosmetics that pass animal tests fail in human clinical trials.
We recognize that we are different from animals, but we fail to see how we can be any more similar to alternatives that are artificial and are grown in an artificial environment. We are more similar to animals than to these so-called alternatives.
I would like to mention that this will be your last participation for each table. Thank you.
Opposite table. How many more people have to die before we admit there is a problem with animal testing?
The only way science can advance is through taking some risks. Through time, we have taken risks and we have succeeded. We can use this as an example that we have used in previous debates. The process of inoculation, in which one would inject oneself with a virus that has been frozen so that they may be immune. If not for the brave people that use this process, we would never have had this today's and modern vaccines.
So, Patibul, you just mentioned that most of the vaccines were discovered by human experimentation, not animal testing. Thank you. Also, well, if you're not aware, there are thousands of life losses thanks to the mistakes that are taken from animal testing. As you may know, for example, Eraldine, Floxine, Isoprel, Oprine, and many others were tested safely in animal testing, and the animals were completely fine. But once tested in humans, babies were born with deficits and deformities. People had heart attacks, many other heart affections. They had problems in their liver, kidneys, stomach, brain. They were completely destroyed by these medicines that were safe in animals, which means that this does not work, and people die because of animal testing and its failures.
Well, is the opposition aware that inoculation was first tested in cows before being tested in humans, and that it was successful in cows as well as humans?
Well, opposite, as mentioned before, the doctor that created the polio vaccine said that he regrets completely that the vaccine was long delayed by the enormous erroneous conception of nature of the human disease based on misleading experimental models of disease in monkeys and other animals, which means that he is completely against proving and testing on animals because it does not work. It only delayed the work that could be done faster and better, cheaper, in less time. And, well, opposite, that just proves how a doctor that tested on animals says it is not worth it.
Complementing what my partner said, the bioethics dictate that we must search for a human-animal benefit, and some toxicity alternative methods have proved to have also animal accuracy in their skin.
Opposite table, let's not forget about the microchip, which is smaller than a USB, and it perfectly imitates the lungs of a human being, and it even stretched yet it imitates more than 20 different human organs.
Once more, the opposition mentions an alternative without giving the results of said alternative. And we mention again, we fail to see how a microchip can represent a human organism more accurately than a living being with a complex system.
Thank you, tables. Now we will have a 10-minute break. During this time, the advisor of each table team will be able to get closer to her students or his students, but without any device or notes. There can be a role switching as long as it is the same order it was when the debate started. No one is allowed to leave the room, not even the judge. The use of mobile and electronic devices is forbidden. If you want to get closer. The audience must remain silent, please. The use of mobile and electronic devices is forbidden, therefore, they must be turned off. Now that the third section of this debate will start, the crossfire section. The dynamic is the speaker will raise their hand to participate. During their participation, the speaker will say an argument so that there is a non-stop exchanging of ideas. Therefore, I will give alternative turns to a member of each table, trying to make their participation as balanced as possible. Participants of the debate, please remember not to monopolize the discussion. Speakers, I need to ask you to keep your hand up to let me know that you want to participate. If the hand is not raised, it's an indication that you no longer wish to participate. We start with favorite team.
We would like to mention data to the opposition as they have so constantly requested. 90.5% of dangerous drugs have been kept out of clinical tests, and that is thanks to animal testing. You have mentioned that animal testing does not result in feasible results, but here it is clearly seen that these 90.5% could actually result in the damage of human lives, and it has been prevented through animal testing.
Table, first of all, of course, we request for data as this is a debate, nor an opinion exchange center or intercourse. Also, opposite table, your information is quite incorrect, as the 90% you mentioned is about the rate of failure of animal testing, not of success. Please, let's not get confused. Also, in the last section, you mentioned that you failed to see how it works. Opposite table, if you fail to see how it works, well, it doesn't mean it doesn't work. You have to find a way to understand it as we have given results.
The 90% rate of failure is a false fact that is constantly cited by many anti-experimentation and completely biased organizations, such as in the case of PETA. The actual quote is, a new medicinal compound entering phase 1 testing, often representing the culmination of upwards of a decade of preclinical screening and evaluation, is estimated to have only an 8% chance of reaching the market. Well, this very easily complements our previously stated sentence of 90.5% of the tested drugs that could damage humans are prevented and do not reach the market. Only the best and the most secure are the ones that actually reach the market.
Opposite table, just for your data, the success rate of some of drugs tested on animals are cancer drugs, just 5%, psychiatrical drugs, 6%, heart drugs, 7%, and neurology drugs, 8%. So testing on animals is not a guarantee for humans to be safe.
And the opposition has not given any alternatives to precisely those stated testings. We have not found any alternatives for those. Most of the alternatives these days are, as you have previously stated throughout the whole debate, for the cosmetic area of experimentation.
Opposite table, we already mentioned some of them. You didn't listen to them probably. Well, we mentioned body tox, eye chips, in silico test, and laboratory produced skin.
We would like to clarify that the low percentages of success do not simply state that animal testing is not effective. It just means that we are still trying to find cures for diseases and that it is a long path ahead of us, but we must continue to find cures.
Table, we're not against finding cures. Actually, we're in favor of it. But we're not in favor of hurting innocent animals that we do not own. They are not ours to take and hurt because it is wrong. It goes against every bioethic law. Also, you mentioned that it's only because that the percentage we gave is only from the oppositions about this, but actually, this data was retrieved from Stanford University, the British Medical Association, Humane Society International, and many others, not just people who is against that.
Most of the alternatives you have mentioned only work on specific organs. They do not satisfy the organ system that humans have. Now, you also mentioned eye chips that can simulate how some organs work, but a simulation is not that accurate. As we previously stated, if complex, sophisticated weather programs cannot accurately predict what will happen in our planet, how do you expect those programs to predict what a drug will do inside of your body? Also, federal laws mandate the testing of pharmaceuticals. They don't just get to the market that way.
Opposite table, what is the point to just waste the lives of the animals if they are not working? The rates, as we mentioned before, are too low. Why don't using alternatives that truly works?
Also, opposite table, quoting the opposite table, only the best reach the market. Many have reached the market and have caused many deaths. For example, the Silert was at an attention deficit hyperactivity, which led 15 children to suffer from acute liver failure after taking this drug. And some of them died and it was tested on animals, and it was supposedly a great drug. It was on markets and killed children. It is not good. Also, the opposite table mentioned that the simulations were not that accurate. Well, animal testing is way less accurate, as only 5% of the experiments are quite functional, because not completely. For example, cancer has not been cured, only in mice, which is not the same as human beings.
As we have previously stated, the said alternatives of animal testing are normally used as a first phase of testing. Once it goes through this is when it's qualified through it passes through an ethics committee that evaluates if it's truly required and the most ethical and humane treatment of these animals, and then it passes through the animal testing, and then the first trials of human testing. Finally, it goes to the population at large. What the opposition will want to do is to skip all the way from from the alternatives directly to human research without having had passed first through a living, breathing organism.
Opposite table, well, we are aware that animal testing is for finding cures. Well, often these experiments are not completed until a human gets the prototype, and then the prototype is changed or updated.
Also, you have mentioned how cancer has been cured in mice, but not in humans. It is something to lament that it has not been cured in humans, but it's also something that we can celebrate, that we have been able to help animals and cure them of a horrible disease such as cancer.
Opposite table, if by curing mice you mean injecting them, forcing them, making them depressed, and producing them in mass as objects, well, that's quite incorrect. Also, the human genome is made up of 20,000 genes, and the animal with the closest DNA has only 90% of equality in the DNA composure, which means that there's a 200 difference of genes. This means that this 200 difference is enormous. For example, only 2 or 3 genes determine your eye color. 200 genes change the complete whole thing of it, and you cannot compare the animal bodies with human bodies, because that's just not correct. And when you use the in vitro test, you're using human tissue cells, which are accurate to humans.
Then tell us, what is the percentage of similarity between these alternatives and human anatomy?
First of all, opposite table, this is not a question answer replica section, so please save your questions for the correct part of the debate. And well, as these alternatives use human cells, the resemblance is 100%, because they are human cells, not animal cells. Not a monkeys, not a dog, not a cat, not a bird, not a mice, not anything like that, because it's humans. So it is accurate in 100%.
We would like to mention to the opposition another benefit for humanity that animal testing has brought. Not only does animal testing provide jobs for the people working in the experimentation, it also provides money to farmers that grow these animals and farmers that grow food for the animals.
Opposite table, as you mentioned before, the cancer has just been cured on mice. But as we mentioned before, we're looking for the best for both animals and humans.
Okay, we're looking for what's beneficial for both species. That's why every single thing we know about veterinary science, a medicine that's specifically for animals and that also benefits humans by giving jobs, as we previously stated, it proves that animal testing benefits both species. We cure animals, we save animals, and we better the economy of humans.
Oh, but table, better the economy of humans is not quite right, as well. The waste book became over 7.3 million of taxpayers, which complained because it was completely wasted. Also, 56.4 million of the government funds in the USA were spent on animal testing that failed. And as you just mentioned before, animal testing has brought benefits, which means no longer, in 20 years, only about 5 or 6 of the experiments are accepted because the others kill humans, so they do not work. So instead of focusing on something that is no longer quite needed, let's move on and improve the alternatives and help as humans and animals without hurting anyone or anybody.
Once more, the opposition mentions the fact that animal testing did work but no longer does, and we failed to see how this correlates with what was previously stated about the evolution of science, since animal testing is a science in and of itself, and through time has evolved and has gotten better and has been more humane and has been more effective and more conclusive and helped for the betterment of mankind.
Well, Apostable, as you failed to understand our argument, because that's what you just said, we will explain it to you. What we mean with this is that it used to work when there were not alternatives, when science was starting. Now that we're in the 21st century, we have the alternatives, we have the money, we have the technology to advance and no longer hurt animals that are not ours to take. So please, Apostable, if you fail to understand an argument, try to think about it and then you can talk about it.
Looks like the opposition has failed to grasp how human anatomy works. They keep talking about tissue cultivation and isolated cells, but as we have mentioned, that's not how the human body works. The human body works as a complex system, which means every single part of the human body works together. You can't just grab a part and isolate it and think that it works, because that's not how the human anatomy works.
Okay, Pharmagene in Royston, England, is the only lab which uses exclusively human tissues for studying how the drugs react with human genes and its proteins. Now that we're in context, quoting Gordon Baxter, co-founder of Pharmagene, if we have human genes information, why using animals?
Well, we will not answer the question, as this is not the question, answer, and replica section of the debate, but we will mention that we will request of the opposition to not assume or have an implicit premise to their arguments and to establish all of the premises, as this is a very common fallacy.
Well, quoting Paul Furlong, a professor of clinical neuroimaging in Aston University, it is very hard to create an animal model that even equates closely to what we are trying to achieve in the human.
Apostable, quoting you, how the human anatomy works. You cannot see how a human anatomy works in an animal because they are animals and humans are different. So human anatomy is completely other thing than an animal anatomy. So do not compare them because Apostable, that's just infeasible and nonsense.
The opposition themselves mentioned the fact that we are similar to certain animals that are at up to a 19% of genetic similarity. That is a lot. That is more than 50%. Therefore, it's the majority there, and it can accurately represent a human. More than said alternatives that only work independently and, as we have previously stated, not as a complex system that we are.
Apostable, if you want a complex system which resembles or is in this case equal to the human beings, we have the microfluid chip. In this microfluid chip, we can imitate the whole system and how it works, and we do not hurt anyone or anything. And this chip contains the human genes, so they're 100% accurate to humans. You mentioned that the 90%, which is the right number, not 90% resemblance, which is a higher, it has a difference of 200 genes. It's way too much Apostable. Even though the percentage is high, the difference is even greater because 200 genes only to define your eye color. Imagine what 200 genes can do. It's way too much, and you cannot compare the animal anatomy to the human anatomy. It's nonsense and infeasible.
Looks like the opposition hasn't comprehended that animals is the closest thing we have to a complex, is the closest thing we have that's similar to the complex system of humans. You have mentioned this isolated tests, but the animals also work as a system because they're living beings, which means we need to test it on animals to see how this drugs, medicines, cosmetics will affect every single part of the organ before it goes to microdosing on humans and then to the market.
Exactly, opposite table. They are not the same as us. So that's why in 1990, only 4 out of 24 side effects were predicted on animals. Testing drugs on animals is meaningless for humans, with a successful prediction rate for side effects only of 5 to 30%.
Following what my table team just said, more than 100,000 humans are killed yearly by prescription drugs that were passed by animal testing.
Also, opposable, if you wonder what's the closest thing to humans, well, the answer is humans, not animals, and their genes, not the animals, which are, as mentioned before, in the microfluid, which is not an isolated system because it includes the whole system and how it works. The only difference is that it has the human genes. So it is 100% accurate, not like animals. And as you mentioned before, animals are living things. They feel. They have the right to live. And maybe not an established right, but opposable, that's just dignity. And they're not ours to take, as mentioned several times before. They're not objects that just can be purchased in factories. That's just completely unethical and wrong.
We fail to see how we are more similar to a microchip than to an actual living being. And we also, well, it was previously stated by the opposition that this microchip was a stimulant to the lungs. And now all of a sudden it has the processing power to be programmed with the whole functions and complex systems and the genes and the functions of all the brain and every single one of our organs and work in the same way as a living being.
When we program things, we program them with information that we already have. And we as a table find it hard to believe that we can test medicines and find cures for diseases we have not much knowledge from in a microchip. Again, microchips are programmed with information we already have, but we do not have the information of specifically 100% how cancer functions, among other mental diseases, because there are way too many factors that affect these diseases. So how could a microchip be tested on and give us results that we would need?
Opposite table, yes, animals are living beings, but they are not human beings. It's not the same testing on animals than in a human. And if we use in vitro chips or whatever, other alternatives, they are all completely full with human information. They have gene cells from humans. So it's just fine to use them.
Yes, proposition. We of course are not the same as animals. So we fail to see how we can give animals rights without obligations. As we humans have, that is the bilaterality of a right. It is we have rights as citizens and we have also obligations. Also, the opposition once more mentions the fact of in vitro testing, and we have previously stated in this debate that 92% of in vitro tests have failed when passing to humans.
So the obligation of the animal is to suffer as a rhetorical question? Okay.
Also, opposite table, the lungs in the microchip were just an example of how fully working it is. And you can put several organs and systems in just one chip with a complete human genome. This completes 100% accuracy. Also, opposite table, you mentioned mental diseases. How are you going to test a mental disease, such as, for example, body dysmorphia in a mice? Opposite, that's just nonsense and completely and absolutely infeasible. Also, we would like to ask you to stop arguing and start argumenting, because we need facts and not just opinions and ideas of how you fail to see how something works or you do. because that's just not what we need. We need facts and something we can debate with, not your opinion.
We ask of the opposition not to strawman our arguments, as we simply stated that we cannot give obligations to animals as they are not capable to have obligations. We never stated that their obligation was to suffer. Also, we never stated that this specific mental illness should be tested on animals and that it was accurately represented in animals.
Opposite table, animals do not get many of the diseases we do, such as Parkinson's disease, major types of heart disease, many types of cancer, as we mentioned before, that was just cured on mice, Alzheimer's disease, or AIDS or schizophrenia. So how are we going to cure these diseases on animals if they just don't get them?
Opposite table, actually, mental diseases were mentioned by one of your members of a team, and the body dysmorphia was just an example of how useless animal testing is on this subject, because you brought it up. Opposite table, please pay attention to our words, because you're starting to confuse our examples with our whole argument, and that's just not how it works.
We did not mention that mental diseases or mental disorders should be tested on animals. We just mentioned that those mental illnesses cannot be tested on the microchips the opposition is mentioning. Why? Because we don't have enough data on them.
Yes, exactly. As we don't have the information and animals do not get these diseases, we can't prove them or try to cure them on animals. So we need to experiment with genomes, human genomes, to find a cure.
This will be your last participation for each member of the debate.
Then if it is found that mental illnesses cannot be properly tested on animals and others, then that must mean also cosmetic industries, it might not be necessary. And if it is found that it is not necessary, then we will not do testing with animals on those. But that does not call for a complete prohibition for animal testing, because it is still necessary. Animals, they give us the spontaneous reactions that we are attempting to learn from. This is where we find, possible reactions for medicines that could backfire and possible reactions of how a disease could act. So there is no possible way that we can refute the necessity for animal testing.
Opposite table, well, as you just mentioned, it does not work for cosmetics or mental diseases, which you are contradicting yourself, as you previously mentioned that that's how it worked. Also, you just mentioned that you're attempting to learn from animals for human beings. That's just nonsense, because as mentioned several times before, animals with the 200 difference in genes, it's completely enormous and it does not work. The alternatives mentioned have already shown many results, while there are more results in fewer years than the ones mentioned from animal testing, and the damages and side effects are way less in vitro tests and all the alternatives mentioned before. If you don't want it to be in vitro tests, we already gave you another whole bunch of alternatives.
Yes, but every single given alternative by the opposition has been an artificial thing in an artificial environment with artificial results. Nothing biological and based on a living organism, as we have previously stated. How can we know the unseen results of a new procedure, of a new drug, if all of the programming of a system, like in the case of the microchips, is predictable and is dictated by algorithms?
Well, opposite table, that's how technology works. It's artificial, that's technology. And animal testing prediction rate for side effects is only 5 to 25%. So it's not a quite big amount of percentage.
The opposition continues to mention microchips, but as we have stated throughout the whole debate, these microchips need to be programmed with algorithms. Now, where does these microchips get the information they know about how the human anatomy works and how they can react to certain diseases? Well, thanks to animal testing. Animal testing has provided knowledge about the unknown and will continue to prove knowledge about what we don't know. You cannot expect some artificial program to start creating out of thin air new ways to cure diseases that we do not comprehend.
Opposite table, how are you willing to know what will happen with an animal if they just don't get the same diseases as we do? And opposite table, isn't it human genomes biological? Okay, animals are now artificial just like their diseases.
Thank you. To finish this debate, each of the tables will expose their closing statement. We remind you it should not take longer than 4 minutes. Starts opposition team. Opposition.
We would like to thank everyone in this debate, the judge, the moderator, the opposition table. There were many points in the debate that weren't clear at the end. The opposition table kept arguing about awareness and ethic terms. However, in which science terms refers, the ethics have not much room. Another example was when we asked about the lethal dose 50. The most used toxicity method for cosmetics and solar creams in nowadays, which has a 50% mortality rate in animals. Is that how animals are being benefited by killing half of the specimens used? However, the Balitox, which was the alternative method that we mentioned, has proved to have 75% of accuracy and 61 in animals. That's how animals are truly being benefited. They also said that animal testing is accurately nowadays. Well, we mentioned about the example of the sleeping pill Palidox that caused 10,000 babies to be born with diseases. How are we sacrificing a new human generation just because we continue and keep using these obsolete methods? The bioethics dictate that we must search for a mutual benefit, human and animal. And it's clearly that animal testing does not achieve this. Are we gonna kill or treat with cruel animals just to cure animals? That's illogic. However, alternative methods need to be put in practice to have the accuracy rates and to search for that mutual benefit for humans and for animals. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank the public, the distinguished moderator, and the jury, as well as the opposition team for such a fruitful debate. And now, my team and I will explain why we think that animal testing should continue. Throughout the debate, we've stated how animal testing has helped both humans and animals in veterinary medicine, as well as the discovery of insulin. Now, the opposition continued to mention how in vitro tests, this tissue samples, these microchips can simulate what some diseases, some drugs can do in the human body. But that's not true. As we have stated throughout the debate and the facts with it, how 92% of in vitro tests have failed, how a microchip cannot expect to cure a disease that we do not comprehend yet, since microchips and sophisticated programs, well, are programmed with knowledge that we already have. Animal testing has provided us with knowledge that we did not know. As we stated in the initial stance, how thanks to some experiments on dogs, we knew how blood flows, how thanks to experiments on dogs, we realized that insulin can help people with diabetes, and diabetes affects both animals and humans. So there's another result that benefits humanity and animals. They also mentioned that animals are tortured, mistreated, that humans do care about them, that we treat them as they were objects, but that's not true. Nowadays, before they can use animals in animal testing, it has to go through a bioethics committee, which means the scientist that wants to use animal testing has to make an essay that justifies why he needs an animal. If the knowledge that he will gain from this experimentation has not been seen, so that the sacrifice, because it is a sacrifice from an animal, they're giving their lives to benefit humans, so it's not in vain. That's why the bioethics committee wants to explain and explicitly says to the scientists that it needs to be new information, it needs to be reliable information, they need to have the living conditions, they need to give them anesthesia, because if the animal is mistreated, then the scientists will not get the information we need. We do not gain anything from treating animals like if they were objects. That's not what we want. With animal testing, we want to treat them as what they are, as living beings that help humans. Also, humans are the dominant species. That's why we use animals. We use them for our own survival. And nowadays, we also use them to cure animals, to help animals, such as we have mentioned with veterinary medicine, because veterinary helps animals. That's their job. It's specific for animals. And how do we cure animals? By doing animal testing that benefits animals. Also, there are some diseases that animals and humans do share, such as diabetes, as we have previously mentioned. They also said that some mental illnesses, that animals do not share some mental illnesses with humans, but that's a fallacy, since animals suffer from depression once they get fatigued, as a test on mice has proven. Now, I would like to state clear that in order for science to keep evolving, in order for the human species to keep on living, to keep on curing the unknown, we need to continue animal testing. Thank you.
The time used by the favor poster was 3 minutes 45 seconds. Thank you. While the judge finished the evaluation, we ask the audience to please remain silent and with your electronic device turned off. Thank you. Before finalizing this debate, we congratulate both teams for offering us such a rich encounter. Please give them an applause. Reminding everyone in the room that only the winner will be announced and the result is unquestionable. The winner table is Morelia with the position posture. Now we ask both of the advisors to come close and sign the result, please.